Welcome to the Art Studio Insights podcast, where we demystify the creative process and exchange ideas with career-minded artists. We are your hosts, Adriana Amay and
Jackie Sanders. We're two emerging artists sharing forward the advice and business lessons we have learned along our journey. So if you're not already, please go ahead and subscribe. This will help other creatives like you find our podcast, and you will be notified when we drop a new episode every week.
So on today's episode, we actually have an artist guest, Sterling Bowen, who is an abstract artist, and we'll dive into background and a little bit of what he's working on and all the things, but figured we would give you a heads up before we dive in. Shall we dive in?
Yeah, let's go. So Sterling, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Pleasure to be here.
Yeah,
Thanks
so
for
why
having
don't you
me.
give us a little background on your work, how you got started, and what your style is like now?
Yeah. Okay. So might be a little hard to kind of see what's behind me, but I would describe the work that I do now as geometric abstraction. I think some folks might describe it as hard edge. When I think of hard edge, I think of something that's with the surfaces that are probably a little bit more flat and distinct than what I'm doing. But I'm fine with hard edge abstraction as a description as well too. Another word that I use a lot to describe my work is formalist, right? Referring there to work where the primary subject matter is color, line, and shape. So I probably, like a lot of creative people, kind of grew up and found that I enjoyed making things, particularly drawing, right? Like a lot of us who end up being artists do. We that's kind of our first creative endeavor when we're kids. And went to art school, probably like a lot of people that are watching this podcast now. Not necessarily everyone, obviously. So I kind of was grounded in a time period in my life and in kind of the academic side of the world of art. And ended up taking, after undergraduate school, taking some time to work, and then went back to graduate school, and found myself pretty frustrated with the academic side of the art world, and ended up taking some time off from graduate school, and it never worked out for me to go back. We were fortunate enough to have our first kid, and it just didn't work out for me to go back and finish my MFA. But I've had a good amount of experience with the kind of that academic art world, and because of where we were in our life when we got pregnant, gave me the opportunity to be a stay-at-home dad with our first kid, which is an experience that I wouldn't trade for anything.
Same. Yeah.
Which was really great. So shortly after that, we moved back to North Carolina, and I ended up kind of putting art at first on the back burner, and then just like in a box in the attic, like, away out of my life. Yeah. Gave my paints and brushes and everything away to some other artists at the time. It took a long break until around 2018 when I started making work again, and that was around the time that I met Adriana and Jackie through what at the time was called Visual Art Exchange, but now just goes by VAE Raleigh. But through that organization, and wanting to get some feedback from some other folks that were in similar places in their career, just kind of starting off, and have continued to enjoy doing critiques with you guys from time to time, and was really excited to get the request to join you guys for a little chat this morning. So anyway, that's kind of, point A to point current, I guess, for Sterling's journey. So
I have some questions, some quick follow-up questions, just kind of establish a timeline, if you will. So You grew up where again?
Oh, so I grew up in Eastern North Carolina. So I'm in North Carolina.
Eastern North Carolina.
North Carolina boy, yeah.
Say the Triangle area, 2018, give or take.
So we had been in the Triangle for a little bit longer than that. We moved back here. My wife grew up here, and we moved back here 2003. So when I started painting again in 2008, it was 18. Close to 15. I painted a little bit when we first got back, but it had been pretty close to 15 years since I picked up a paintbrush when I started again in 2018. So some of it was, it's the whole writing. It's like
Muscle
learning
memory.
about it. Muscle memory, it took a minute for it to come back, but yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's so interesting, especially coming from the relatively strict academia world. I have a similar background, went to undergrad and got my master's, and I took 3 years off painting right after I graduated. And I feel like that's kind of a natural ebb and flow of the creative journey for a lot of artists that doesn't get talked about a lot. And I would love to go into that more today. But like you said, we met actually a few years back. I think I started the critique groups in 2019.
Me too.
Yeah. And that was right when I felt like that group is like the perfect place for so many people that we kind of like restarted our art career in a sense by coming to that group. And many of us were either starting a new style, maybe had just come back after a break. And it was such kind of like that perfect moment of a handful of us all coming together. It was like a perfect blend of similar styles, but not exactly the same, getting helpful feedback that's constructive, but still supportive. And it's so cool to be able to, especially as an adult, after you're kind of used to that academia setting, you have this many projects a semester, there's going to be a critique after it, to then get critique groups as an adult working professional. That's not necessarily something I even knew was possible when I left college, and never really thought to seek out either. So I think it was so cool how we got to meet and now have continued our creative relationship together.
Yeah, I agree.
I do want, before we go further, to see for those of our listeners that are perhaps not watching a YouTube video and they can't see your work, which obviously we will link everything in the episode notes so people can see your work.
Yeah.
But if you could perhaps, for someone that's just listening and not seeing your work, could you more or less describe what you do? Specifically I want to bring it up because you have 2D and 3D. So could you kind of describe more or less what it looks like for somebody that's never seen your work?
Yeah, so the consistent thing between two-dimensional work, like what you see behind three-dimensional work, which if I had one hand, I would hold it up, but I didn't plan well. The consistent theme, I would say, is the use of a cube. The paintings are based on a drawing system of using interconnected isometric cubes. You get 3 voids that come together to make cube in perspective. And the 3-dimensional work I do exclusively utilizes small to medium sized wood cubes as well too. And there's some reasons for that. I think I mentioned already, I consider myself to be a formalist, someone whose subject matter is line, color, and shape. That's a readily recognizable shape for a lot of people. So, and also it has a lot of reference to art history as well too, specifically to a lot of artists who probably would also have called themselves formalists. And so it can kind of be a shorthand. It points to a thing in art history, right? Is kind of how I think about it. But even though I think some people might assume because I use geometric shapes that I'm interested in control and structure. But I think if you saw my paintings or the cubes, you would see that I'm not. It's not that I don't care about craft, but I'm not super fussy. There are plenty of hard edge painters out there that the paint doesn't even go on the canvas unless there's tape in place, and it's not that the game for me. The way that I put the 3D work together is actually, once it's made, it's fairly intuitive. It's a process of literally picking some random points on a wall and then just kind of working with the cubes, almost like drawing freehand. And the paintings start that way as well too. And even the one behind me where I knew basically what color I was going to use. There's still a bit of the process that's pretty intuitive. So even though I'm not a gestural abstractionist, right? There is a good bit of work, which is, to me, it's about creating a framework I can play inside of, I guess. This play's not a very academic word. The academic word would be intuitive process or something like that. But I think for the average person, if they were trying to understand that, be like, oh, you're playing, right? Which is not to diminish that when we bring that into our process. It's just, it is an unstructured time where you are simply reacting without an objective goal necessarily, right?
Yeah, exactly. You're like making a decision, then reacting to that decision in order to make the next decision. Because yeah, you're right. Most people, when they think, oh, if you do cube focused imagery, they would think very strict, tight, hard lines. And there's some elements in some of your pieces that are like that, but they definitely are super expressive and gestural. And I think one of the elements I love about your work is especially the layering aspect of it. The layering of lines, the layering of colors, and then even sometimes physical layering of materials too, including like transparency elements and hand drawings over top of paintings. So how exactly did that style develop for you? Have you always been drawn towards like geometric marks? And obviously you have a robust knowledge of art history that we all continue to benefit from every single critique. So where did that really come from, or the earliest time you remember being drawn towards that?
Yeah, for the podcast listener, Jackie's referring to the fact that I'm well known in a critique circle for making recommendations of artists that other people should look at.
Yep, it's the best.
If anyone is interested, my blog, which is very easy to find, sterling.com, I've cataloged over 800 abstract artists. So if anyone's interested in taking advantage of that, it's free and available to the public, and you can look through that catalog. So when I was in grad school, I actually kind of stumbled across and working a commission. I was creating grids with tape that weren't cubes; they were just very straightforward grids, and painting, activating the space inside of those grids, painting, and then at one point, I think I protrude, imagine the grid as a flat surface and protruded an isometric cube forward out of it in a couple of studies. And then I got to thinking about, it's like, maybe it should just all be cubes. And so this is kind of a project that I actually started on when I was still in graduate school, this kind of system of drawing. And the paintings were pretty different then. But when I started painting again in 2018, it was like, well, where do I start again? Or where do I start, I guess? And so the question became, let's start again with something that I didn't really feel like was resolved in graduate school. And so that it was an easy place to start. And I've still, 2018 to now, coming up on 4 years. I haven't gotten tired of it or exhausted it, I feel like, yet. So I'll continue to work on it. Or work through it, whatever the right phrase is, until it's either exhausted or boring to me, and then we'll see what's next. I think there's plenty of examples getting art history of artists who abstract painters or sculptors who will work with a particular motif for some period of time and then decide that it's they have exhausted all they can get out of it and move on to something else. Sometimes they're clean breaks. Sometimes they look more like transitions.
Definitely.
But it's, for now, it allows me, like I said, it allows me structure to kind of play inside of that I find to be really productive. So I'm just kind of enjoying it for all I can get out of it for now.
What is your favorite art movement, and has it influenced your work? So my favorite art movement is typically what's called light and space. So that's a bucket that has people like Robert Irwin and Flavin and there's can't remember his name right off the top of my head. I'm sorry. I'll come back to it.
People in a minute. Can refer to it on your website, I'm sure.
People can refer to it on my website. James Turrell. I don't know how I forgot him. Yeah. So if your viewers have been to art museums in the last 4 years, likely they've seen something from one of those three artists. And there are others like Doug Wheeler that are still practicing today. All of those guys are still alive, I believe. I think Dan Flavin's alive. I know Robert Irwin and Sherelle are. What was influential to me about work that exclusively used like light and space as a subject matter was that it really foregrounded like having a very real, visceral sense experience when you were looking at art. And even though I have remained a painter, sometimes installation artist, I like when I think about the work that I've enjoyed the most, it's always like the kind of experiences that that group of artists has created. That's really cool. I do have actually aspirations. You guys probably remember I did back in. I was actually inspired by you, Jackie, and instead of doing daily drawings like you do, I started doing those daily photographs of the glow in the dark cubes that you guys probably remember from my Instagram feed. So I am interested in opportunities to work with light in relation to the cubes as well too. It just hasn't expanded to that point yet. That gets into a whole like installation work gets into a whole other set of technical issues.
Yeah,
that,
definitely. There's so many other factors. And I feel like especially the way your work is, like we touched on earlier, and how technically you can be defined as a painter, but so many of your pieces also have sculptural elements. You've done custom size substrates that then become installations on the wall or site specific where it's physical cubes. So you really are not bound in your style and work that you've made over the past few years by, okay, it has to stay on this size canvas or this size, even sculpture. They all really become experiences as they are displayed in different spaces. So I feel like an installation in that regard, especially incorporating light, is the obvious next step, in my opinion. So
I'm looking forward to, yeah, I'm looking forward to being able to experiment with that a little bit more down the road. It doesn't, with having a full-time job right now, currently, painting and the installation work that I've come up with kind of is able to kind of fit in the little buckets that I'm able to make available for a little bit more than like having a very developed installation studio practice where I basically, I think like of the setup you need for that kind of work, almost like having access to a small theater. You can stage things and play around with your own lights and stuff like that and kind of learn how all that stuff works. And it sounds really fun to me. I might actually give me an opportunity to collaborate with both of my kids. The younger one is helps me with their woodworking projects, and the older studying light and sound right now at Guilford Tech. So it could give me the opportunity to collaborate with my kids, which would be really fun, I think, as well too.
Yeah, and that's awesome that you're able to bring them into the process. And that's actually honestly the perfect transition, mentioning that you do have a day job that you work and you also are a very successful artist as well. So what does that part of your studio practice look like? Do you have certain hours each week that you set aside, or is it just when there's time? Like, what does that creative process look like from a logistics standpoint? Obviously, with the kids being older now, you can recruit them to your studio as studio helpers, which is very helpful.
Well, I have used the older one actually has done some work for me, but paid because I believe that people who work should be paid for their time.
Especially artists.
Yeah, but especially artists, it's very easy to kind of write that stuff off. So you can't see right here to my right, but I work in the office. The timing for us adding this is right now. Of adding on this studio was really fortuitous. I moved in here at the end of 2019. So once everybody went to working remote early in 2020, it was very convenient for me to have this space. So the short answer for those who are looking, those of your viewers who would like a strategy, like how to manage this stuff, I am a maniacal calendar user. I don't, there's not a lot of like regularity to my schedule ever, like week to week to week. Part of that is, being a spouse and a father. But my job in general is an account manager in energy business. Some weeks, are 45, 50 hour weeks, 60 hour weeks. Sometimes if I pull for work, sometimes there's really not that much to do. Like, the one of the best rules of thumb for a good account manager is you got to know when to bug your people and when not to. And sometimes the answer is don't bug your people. So I have a amount of flexibility in my office and my studio are the same. So I'll sometimes, like during the week, I can cut on my favorite energy podcast. For those of you who are interested, I know there's some podcast listeners out here. Is a guy named David Roberts, whose podcast is Volts. I encourage you to listen to some, and I encourage you to support him. financially if you're able to as well too. So that's a shameless plug for my day job field. But I'll listen to a podcast by David Roberts and get a lot of my painting processes are like, with this painting behind me, for example, when I've got to add the cartooning line in, that's just me standing there with a maul stick and a paintbrush and slowly like painting lines, grid lines, right? And you can do you can be half asleep and do that. So
right, it's like a relatively repetitive process. It's because there are parts of the creative process where you're more in your creative brain, and other parts that are more just like execution.
It's mechanical, right? Exactly. Yeah. So I, sometimes I'll get, opportunity where I've got 30 minutes between a call and I'm just looking at a study over out of the corner of my eye and I'm like, all right, I'm going to go put a little more green on that or something like that, So I can take little breaks and work in my studio. And I'm really fortunate too that my my company in 2000, you guys know this because the three of us was Anna, Joe back in October at 311 Gallery. Yes. In 2020, our company during the summer of that year decided that we were going to take Fridays off. So it did, like Monday through Thursday got a good bit busier, right? Because you had to compress 5 days of work into 4 days, right. But it made you more efficient. It made you more disciplined with your time management. And then I got an extra weekend day every week. So as you guys were well aware from how much work I dropped off at 311 install day, I made a bunch of work in the summer of 2020. So it allowed me to stock up on inventory. So I feel really fortunate to have had that as well too. So the nice thing about it too is that having a day job, it does mean less time painting, and I would love to spend more time painting. There's a benefit on the other side too, which is that my artwork doesn't have to pass through a commercial filter necessarily. That has been kind of a rich place for it. I don't have to support myself with it, I guess might be another way of saying that. But it doesn't have to have a commercial filter on it right now. I would relish the opportunity to be a full-time practicing artist. I think most of us probably would, nothing to do with commercial success, but and you guys know this from artists that you like, that are full-time practicing artists. It's better for the work, right? The work that comes out of that kind of time investment is really great. And that would be the thing that I would enjoy the most about being able to be a full-time practicing artist. But for now, I feel that clean energy is immensely important to being able to leave a planet for my children and your children and everyone's children's children. So I'm more than glad to continue to do that work as long as I can. And I hope there is an inflection point where I spend less time making money for other people and more time making artwork.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think that's one thing that is so great, that having a day job, if you have to work for someone else, it's great that it's for a mission that you so strongly believe in and there's a bigger purpose behind it, versus there may be some other day jobs that's more energy sucking and maybe a negative part of your life that okay, at least it's something you can get behind.
I've often told people that I think one of the reasons that I was able to put art aside from 2003 to 2018 is my career very fulfilling. And it filled a spot in my life. And some days my job does wear me out, right? I don't set myself a goal to actually answer the question you asked. I don't set myself a goal of a certain number of studio hours per week or anything like that. I tend to be very reactive to when the energy level is right. When the energy level is right, I'll go in the studio and stay in there till 11:30, 12 o'clock at night, even if I've got work the next day, right? If the energy level's right, I'm in there, I've got my music on, I'm dancing, I'm painting, I'm just
that's what you and Adriana have in common.
Turn the spigot on and just let it go, Yes. But if I get to the end of a really long, emotionally exhausting work day and I'm what I need is to make a martini and sit on the couch with my wife while she reads and pet the dog, then that's what I'm going to do. And I don't try to force it. Although I will say, we were just talking about the mechanical stuff, sometimes it's all right, look, I don't have anything going on right now, go to take the martini, get up off the couch and go put it right here. And get your yardstick out and spend 40 minutes just painting signs.
Painting
just,
and
just keep, yeah. Yeah.
But real quick, going back a little bit to like, I think it was an awesome point that's worth highlighting too. You were talking about that shift between having a day job and then the like positives, but also potential negatives of going full time with your artwork, is recognizing like that does shift or could shift your creative practice, because you kind of are forced to be aware of the commercial aspect of it, depending on how your finances are and the quote unquote like sellable value, and when you're using that to pay your bills. So there can be a freedom to not relying on the work to have to pay for the roof over your head each month. But like you were saying, when you had Fridays off in the studio, just having, okay, that's 6, 7, maybe 10 hours if you really get in the groove of extra time every single week that you just get to commit to your creative practice and crank out work, and you really only evolve by executing it. I know that's one thing Adriana talks a lot about, because you're always, I will literally walk in this studio and Adriana has like 6 new paintings and I'm like, what is going on? And it's so cool. And you're the same way, like you're saying, with that exhibition of just like pulling work on paper after canvas. And it's just like this prolific, amazing portfolio of just time in the studio. Nothing beats it.
Yeah, it becomes a question too. Something that you brought up that would be an interesting point to discover is perhaps at some point there might be an opportunity, just like you were able to enjoy 4 days a week, perhaps to go part-time in some way, shape, or form later on down the road. And that way you'll still have the income to pay, your share of the bills, so to speak, but then also your art. That's kind of what we were talking about. Like, there's no shortcut. You have to put in the work to evolve the work.
Yeah.
Then it's like you'll have more hours available to do so. But I also found it really interesting, and I'm glad you mentioned how you protect your energy and see how you're feeling before you go into it. What I'd be curious about real quick about that and the whole balancing day job versus like studio time. Do you have any rituals or any steps or anything specific that you do to help your brain switch from one side to the other? Where you just say, like, besides the studio martini, like you put on some music, or you put, I don't know, like burn a candle, I don't know, whatever it is. But do you have anything where you just kind of help yourself say, whether I feel inspired or not, maybe I feel the flow, but I'm not sure what I'm going to work on. Do you have anything that you do that tells your brain, that's it, it's go time? Like, inspired or not, but we're going to do this. Like, do you have
music does help a lot. And I don't always have to have a martini. I've actually, I think probably a lot of us developed some maybe unhealthy habits over the last year and a half in terms of alcohol consumption. So I personally have been trying to be more conscientious about that lately. And any of your podcast viewers that are struggling with that, I would encourage you to address that in your own lives as well too. But music is a big one for me. I find music can kind of turn my energy level up, particularly if I like think about what's going to get my energy level right. Because like sometimes I just want to listen to some real quiet, some Thievery Corporation or some old Portishead from when I was in college, something that's real mellow, like on a Saturday morning. But yeah, if it's Wednesday evening and I need to get, take it from like a 3 to a 6, right? Maybe we're going to put something on that makes me want to dance a little bit. One of the things that I do find helps in my studio practice is to just have a lot of different things going on. So I've got, finished pieces, the things on the wall behind me are smaller studies. So I have another little easel where I always have a few studies going. I always try to have some work on paper going as well too. Or, just have a sketchbook handy if I just need to like sit and do some of the drawings for a little bit to kind of get the brain activated. And then the cubes kind of became that for me for a while as well too, right? Because I could always, if I didn't have anything that I wanted to work on, I could just come in the studio and put a few cubes in random places on the wall and make a temporary, installation and experiment with that a little bit as well. So I think for my personality, having a number of different things going on in the studio can really help you, because there's always like something you come in and it's like, well, I don't want to draw right now, and I don't want to. I cannot even look at the finished painting right now, but I can go work on this study for a little bit, right, or something like that, or just get some, like yeah, Adriana does her little color swatches all the time in her little book, just like,
Uh-huh.
I've got a drawing board, with paper taped off on it. And it's like, okay, well, we can do some little quick, not even like studies for a painting, just like what colors
With
do
your
I
hand.
want to potentially use? Just move my hand and do something.
How do you define success as an artist?
Okay, so how do I define success as an artist, right? So, as we've talked about, being a full-time practicing artist for me would be kind of an ideal situation. So success in achieving that would be a huge measure of success. Like however I get there, whether it's winning the lottery or getting my Warholian 15 minutes of fame that catapults me into that kind of a situation or something like that.
Yeah.
Or just getting to the point where I have kind of wrapped up my career in clean energy, and now I have the opportunity to go and do what I want to do. So that would be a success for me to be able to achieve that. I think there's also the element of, and in this respect, I don't feel like my attitude is too different from a lot of musicians or actors or other theater folks and or writers, right? In that there's I'll call it critical acclaim, right? Like, but having people who look at a lot of work, look at your art and say, oh, that's worth looking at. I guess,
Right.
for lack of a better way to put it. Yeah, outside of that, like, what would success? I just feel immensely privileged to even be able to do this.
Yeah.
But if I could snap my fingers and be a success, it would mean being a practicing artist and and out of that, my work being good enough that some folks in the critical community would occasionally pay attention to what I was doing and say, hey, y'all should check this out too.
Do
Yeah.
you tie any financial notes to that, or is it more of a legacy situation where it's like, I want to produce this body of work through my lifetime. I want people to recognize it. Perhaps someday it'll go into a museum or into art history books. Do you, as part of your definition of success, do you tie anything financial to it, or that's not really a priority? Question, because
Yeah,
for some people it's not. They're just like, if I never get
yeah,
paid, I don't care. As long as I'm in the art history book, I
yeah.
want that more than getting paid for it.
Yeah, I think I do have a certain lifestyle to which I am accustomed.
Fair enough.
Makes sense.
That comes from having a day job, right? And so
Yeah.
I don't. There are some elements of that that I would sacrifice to have a more simple life, for sure. But we being my spouse and I are making plans to make sure that the work that I am doing now allows that to not be an issue down the road. And so I think what you were kind of asking away, Adriana, is like, would I like for my paintings to be very valuable either during my lifetime or after my lifetime? And I think the after my lifetime thing probably is more of the critical acclaim thing. And that doesn't really
Yeah.
have any currency for me. I don't get to enjoy that in my lifetime.
Just watching
uh,
from above, being like, look
yeah.
at that in that big museum wall.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
but I don't know if you guys can see this print back here behind me, but it was in the house when we bought this house, and it's by a woman named Donna Yeager, I think. But she, if you Google her, you can't find a lot on her. But she taught at the Art Institute of Chicago, and you can find her prints. And this was a series of, I think, 150, and they're still worth around $250. So she obviously had enough relevance to a certain period in a certain region of art history that her
Yeah.
things are still somewhat valuable. And I just think about, like, she's never someone I would have learned about in an art history class. If I didn't live in Chicago when she was making work, I probably would never have met her. But I bet she would say that her art life was very satisfying because she got to make what she wanted to, right? And she probably was able to survive in the world, and so I think about, that's one of the reasons I have this up. Not only was it like it was here in the house when we bought it, so it kind of like is a piece of the house's history kind of moving forward in a way, but it also kind of reminds me that, like, there's success and then there's success, right? Like if I don't ever, I'm not going to consider myself a failure if I'm not ever on the cover of Art in America or Art Forum. That would be really cool to know that I made something. Like what if you think about how much artwork is made in the world,
right?
Yeah.
To be cover status, right?
Yeah,
it's pretty fly. But if that doesn't ever happen, I won't consider that I wasn't a success. It's just there's levels of success, I think.
Yeah.
And you have to decide what you're satisfied with. And it's such an immense privilege to be able to get to do what I do. And I would love to be able to spend more time on it. But I'm not trying to like hammer out a place in art history for Sterling. Like the name of my blog is Painting After Art is Dead, because I kind of feel like that's where we are in art history. Like there's nothing left that has to be painted. So just like paint, it's actually incredibly liberating that we no longer have to carry the weight of art history with us. We can certainly learn from it, but we don't have to carry it forward somewhere. It's like, it doesn't have to go anywhere, guys. It's dead. Just put it down.
Yeah. And do whatever you want.
And do whatever you want, So
that's funny. And I absolutely love that, especially like you're saying, like almost defining success as how you're spending your time and your personal fulfillment. And of course, the external validation and accolades are wonderful. And
who doesn't like that? Who doesn't like that? Right?
Everyone loves that. And honestly, I have no doubt that you will hit those, because especially over just the growth the past 4 years of knowing you, it's been amazing to watch you on your journey and to be a little bit of a part of it. But what advice would you have for someone if they were just starting out in their creative practice, whether maybe going to college or if they had taken a long break after academia or after big life events and they were wanting to get back into the creative practice? What advice do you wish you had heard before you got started on your creative journey?
Or restarted.
Yeah, or restarted on your creative journey.
That's interesting. I don't know if there's anything that I could have heard earlier that would have changed the approach that I took. I feel like that criticism can be really important if you kind of understand how to filter it. I was actually trying to pull up for someone just starting out, if anyone is just starting out watching this podcast, whether you're in school or not, I think you would hear this from anyone who's been in art school or works in an art school, is you just have to make a lot of stuff.
Just make more artwork.
The one piece of advice I remember above everything else that I heard or learned in undergraduate school was Eric Anderson, the painting professor, who said that we've all got to make at least 200 paintings before we make a single good one. And that was just like a challenge he threw down to all the freshmen up front. But I was looking up a post that someone who's an artist from the West Coast had put on Instagram earlier in the week that I found. There's the 10 rules, and this gets posted at Immaculate Heart College's art department. I don't really know anything about this university. I don't know anyone who's graduated from there or anyone who teaches there, but there's 10 rules. One is the general duties of a student are to pull everything out of your teacher and pull everything out of your fellow students. So if you're reviewing this and you're an undergrad trying to think about yourself as an artist on the other side of that, I admitted to dropping out of art school because I was frustrated with art school and art academia. But while you're there, get as much out of it as you possibly can.
Yeah.
And the other one and what I was just saying about make work, like rule number 7 on this list, and is the only one that's capitalized on all the rules, is the only rule is work. That's all that matters when you're first learning. It's just. And another one closely related to that resonated for me when I saw this was consider everything an experiment, right? Like, particularly when you're just starting out. And then in grad school, the most insightful thing that anyone said to me was actually from one of my colleagues who I'm still in touch with, who became a really good friend of mine, who's not an abstract painter, he's a figure painter. He said, there's never any such thing as an art emergency, right? Like, even if something's not going wrong with a painting, it's not an emergency, right? Like, you kind of have to. It doesn't mean don't take things seriously, there's no such as an art emergency, right? Like, and I know there's people reading this are like, oh my God, what if you have a show coming up and you've got to get work ready for us? Like, well, exactly what that means, right? It doesn't mean that there can't be deadlines that are urgent. It just means that nothing is really an emergency. Maybe that's another way of saying don't take yourself too damn seriously. I don't know.
I was just about to say that. I think that's great advice, because sometimes, especially as if you're pursuing it, wanting to go full time, or if you have certain business goals that you want to meet, approaching your artwork as a business or from like the entrepreneur mindset, you're like, this defines me as an artist and I have to hit this, where it's like, okay, take a step back. Everything's fine. This is not an emergency. Like, you're doing what you love, and like remembering that is super great advice of like, you're spending time bringing something to life, which is magical. Like, it was in your brain and then you made it come into the world. So like, be easy on yourself. You're doing a good job.
And as we wrap this up, question for you. If somebody handed you $100 right now, just, fresh bill, what would you splurge it on or invest it on? It has to be something that brings you joy and is related to your art or business.
Brings me joy is related to my art business. It's like getting back to the light thing that I was talking about earlier, like when we were talking about light space and how I'd want to experiment more with light. I probably find like it would be really easy for me to say one of two things. A, I would go get a bottle of Macallan 16-year scotch to enjoy in my studio, or I would just go walk into Jerry's Artorama with $100 in my pocket and grab, the 10 things that caught my eye, right? One of those two things. But like, if I had to make to be serious, if I had $100 that I needed to make an investment on a next place for my art to go, it would be something related to buying some equipment to do more work with light, probably.
You probably get cool light boxes or cameras and
something
projectors.
Towards the evolution of
right. Yeah,
I like that.
Yeah, $100 probably wouldn't go too far with electronics. It would be better than $0, right? For
That's
that.
fair.
So,
maybe you invest the $100 in the stock market and then wait until it increases to 1,000
back in 5 years. Stocks are really cheap this week, apparently. So maybe it would be a good week to run an extra $100 to buy some bottomed out stocks and then sell them again in 3 weeks.
There you go.
I'm like, as someone that worked in that industry, I'm like,
having flashbacks to the corporate world.
Yeah, kind of. Well, I'm like seeing red flags. I'm like, don't. It doesn't work that way.
The financial advisor.
No day trading. But anyways, different story for a different day.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Sterling, for being on our podcast. We had so much fun talking to you about your work and creative evolution, and we're excited to see your future installations and exhibitions that you have coming up. For our listeners who want to stay connected with you, go ahead and do the shameless plug of all your things, your social media, website. Where can they find you and continue learning about your journey?
Sure. My Instagram handle is pretty easy, Sterling at Sterling Bowen. I do have a Facebook page, which for those of you that prefer that social media platform, is pretty much just a republish of my blog. But that is at Painting After Art is Dead. If you're on Facebook, my blog is sterling.com. Again, pretty easy to find. There's a subscription feature for that. So whenever I post mostly blogs about other artists, but every couple of weeks I'll do an update about what's going on in my own studio too. Those are the easiest ways to find me. I think I'm on Tumblr, but I think Tumblr is the same as Facebook. It's just a repost of my blog, so I don't really do anything with that platform. So that's where to find me. If you're in clean energy, I'm on LinkedIn as well too. So feel free to look me up if you have an interest in that. My favorite things to do, in addition to teaching and doing critiques and helping other artists help themselves better and help me get better, is help folks that want to get into the clean energy industry as well too. So if that's something you're interested in, find me on LinkedIn, look me up.
Awesome. That sounds amazing. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Such a pleasure to be with you guys. I hope that we will all get to be in together again before too much longer. That would be great to get to do that again.
Yeah, we'll have to do a critique with a glass of wine and a cheese plate. Seems to be our common trend, which
plate of nuts.
Like it.
Yes.
Like it. I think it's you guys' turn to host too.
Yes, you'll have to come by our space, come to our studios. There's a lot of new artwork in here, which is very exciting.
Well, again, we're glad you joined us on today's episode. And for everybody listening or watching this, we really hope you enjoyed our conversation.
As always, both of our blogs will be linked in the show notes where you can find episode notes, resources that we talked about with Sterling, as well as links to all of his social medias and website, and links to all of our other podcast episodes.
If you want to stay connected with us in between episodes and share what you have learned, maybe have some, tips and tricks based on today's conversation, you can follow us on social media. I'm at May Art across all platforms.
And I'm at J Sanders Studio on all platforms. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week.